story here from the Fairton and Newport United Methodist Churches. And I've got another story for us for this week, and next Monday I'm going to be reading Thanksgiving books. And this week we are reading the story of the first Thanksgiving. Okay, so I'm going to learn something probably today. Going way back for the story. It says, in old time, so long ago that only the rocks remember, the last glacier began to melt. So we're going way back. As it turned to water, mountains of gravel trapped in the ice were dumped on the coast of New England. One mass, shaped like a flexed arm, is Cape Cod. And on top of the gravel, the glacier deposited huge boulders that it carried from distant places. One settled in Plymouth Harbor. It is a boulder of Dedham granite. There's a lot of names in here I'm going to butcher today, and I apologize to anyone who's indigenous and I'm reading you these names wrong. I'm not doing it to be spiteful or whatever. Anyhow, the only Dedham granite in the entire area. So this is a rare kind of granite because it was like a wandering pilgrim. It left its home in Africa 200 million years ago, when the land was breaking up into continents. Eons later, battered by these glaciers, all 200 tons of it came to rest in lonely splendor on a sandy beach in a cove. And this boulder we come to know as Plymouth Rock. It don't look like much air in that rendition, but there's stuff under the water, I guess. The climate warmed. Wild grasses, flowers, and trees took root in the land behind the huge rock. In time, their growing and dying made a deep, rich loam in which a magnificent forest grew. So it made it so things could grow. In the forest came bears, deer, brightly colored birds, and the Pawtuxets, a tribe of the Wampanoag, the people of the dawn. The Pawtuxets planted corn, beans, squash, and pumpkins. They hunted the deer and turkeys and fished the sea and freshwater streams. Every year they gave thanks to these gifts to Mother Earth at the Green Corn Dance, which lasted many days. Okay, in the early 1600s, Englishmen, visited their shores more and more frequently. These men sailed in ships with butterfly wings, killed with guns, and kidnapped the Wampanoag men for slaves. The Indians became deeply afraid of what they called them, the white man. On a spring morning, the Pawtuxets' worst fear was realized. A tall ship manned with armor-clad Englishmen sailed into their cove. The men came ashore and traded pots and beads for fur and fish. They tricked 17 Pawtuxet men into coming onto their ship, pulled anchor, and sailed off with them. One of these men was Squanto. Okay, so they have their huts and all the trees. I forgot. There's the boat. So we talk about Squanto right now. The Pawtuxets were taken to Spain, be sold into slavery. As it happened, Squanto was sold to an Englishman, and he was taken to London. He lived in the household of a merchant ship owner. He sailed to Newfoundland, back to England, and finally home to New England. So he came back to where he originally started. As Squanto jubilantly strode toward his village in 1619, he suddenly slowed his stride. No children clambered over the big rock. No voices sounded. He pushed back the bushes and walked into his village. The homes they called Wheatus were skeletons. The cornfields had grown to weeds. All his people were dead of a European plague, so they got sick and died. In grief, Squanto returned to the English sailing ship and was dropped off on the coast of Maine for the winter. That was nice of him. The following spring, he joined Massasoit, the sachem of the Wampanoag English community. I'm sorry for the names. Here we go. And this is his village was born. In another world across the ocean, King James I of England ordered every citizen to join the Church of England or be hounded out of the realm. But the Puritans refused to obey. They believed they had the right to worship in their own manner. Imagine that. They were arrested, imprisoned, some were hanged. Under cover of darkness, a group escaped to Holland. They thought of themselves as religious wanderers, whom we now call pilgrims. After 12 years of poverty in Holland, the pilgrims decided to seek their fortune in the New World. I'm putting that in quotes for myself because it wasn't new. Anyhow, financed by merchant adventurers, they loaded 2 sailing ships with food, seeds, and tools for building and farming. They also carried firearms and armor to protect themselves against vicious animals and the people of the world they called savages. And they do put that in quotes, savages. They called them savages. There we are, and they're getting the boats ready. After long delays for repairs, only one ship, you probably know this, the Mayflower, that should sound familiar, was fit to cross the ocean. So on September 6, 1620, 102 men, women, and children, and their furniture, hens, pigs, dogs, and 9 cats. I don't know why they counted the cats, but they crowded aboard that small cargo ship, the Mayflower. Now, the growing season was over in the New World, and winter was coming. Not the best time to go, I guess, but they trusted God, and in their own courage, the pilgrims nevertheless set sail. So hardly had the Mayflower moved into the open waters than the skies blackened. A storm whipped the ocean into tumultuous waves. The wooden ship rode up swells as high as mountains and plunged deep into the sea as deep as canyons. Her timbers moaned and her rigging shrieked. No sooner did the tempest end than another rode in. So they just kept going, and the storm kept going. So they crowded below deck. The pilgrims suffered seasickness. I bet they did. The children clung to each other and to their parents to keep them from being thrown against the hull, because it was kind of rough. They prayed, though. They sang. They read their Bibles without complaint. That's saying something. And they endured. There's a picture of the storm, the Mayflower. Okay. Land ho! At 7 o'clock in the morning of November the 9th, Cape Cod was sighted in the steely dawn. The nightmare, it seemed, was over. Wishing to go no further on the angry ocean, they agreed that New England, not the Hudson River, would be their new home. The captain sailed the Mayflower into the shelter of what is now called Provincetown. I can't read this name for some reason today. Provincetown Harbor. After scouting Cape Cod for a settlement site to no avail, they entered Plymouth Harbor, where the pilot, on an earlier trip, had seen the deserted Pawtuxet village. A landing party set sail for shore in the December freezing rain. Near an island, the wind snapped that boat's mast and broke the rudder. The shallop was swirled out to sea on a raging current. A seaman grabbed an oar and, straining with all his strength, pulled the boat to shore and mended it. On December 11th, 1620, the pilgrim men landed on Plymouth Harbor beach. And they jumped into the icy waves, fighting the sea and wind, secured the shallop to the Plymouth Harbor glacial rock. Their clothes had frozen to the boards by the time they lit a blazing fire into the deserted village. They warmed themselves, drank the sweet water of the springs that ran into the town, what's called Town Creek, and planned the village of Plymouth. The houses would be close together and near the fields already cleared by the Indians. On top of the highest hill, they would erect the platform or fort. The pilgrims had a home. This was them securing the boat. Well, they got one poor guy doing it. I'm sure there was more out there helping them, I hope. Anyhow, the building was delayed by a violent storm. And it was not until January 2nd that the trees were felled and sawed into boards. In less than a week, the common house was erected. Then, in snow and wind, the man began hammering their own homes together. So building a village. Winter struck with such cruel intensity that the Governor Carver, I guess somebody elected themselves as governor here, permitted the families to stay on the Mayflower, the actual boat. The ship would not return to England until spring. Food supplies dwindled. The Pilgrim men killed a few fowl and dug clams and mussels. But they were townspeople, and they knew little about hunting and fishing. As they grew weak, they huddled on the Mayflower in blankets and layers of clothes. They sang and read their Bible. Governor Carver meted out 5 kernels of Indian corn to each person each day. The scouts had found corn stored in reed baskets buried in the sand of Cape Cod. The disease followed the hunger. Death followed the disease. 8 pilgrims died in January, 17 in February, 13 in March. The dead were buried in the darkness of night. The pilgrims did not want the savages, and they do put that in quotes, to know that they had died for fear of attack. They didn't want to appear weak. They marked the graves only with a prayer. So here they are at night. Okay. When spring arrived, only 57 pilgrims and half the crew had survived. 17 were children. Saddened but determined, the pilgrims returned to their dank homes. On March 17th, they planted. The women seeded English herbs and vegetables in their kitchen gardens. The men planted peas, wheat, and barley. They split wood, sawed boards, gathered thatch reeds from the marshes, and scouted for Indians. Although their military men and commander Miles Standish had been shot at by the Indians on Cape Cod, the pilgrims had yet to meet one terrible savage. Terrible savages, they do put that in quotes, for their part, were watching the pilgrims from behind trees and bushes, learning everything they could about them. On a cool April day, hungry and thin, their clothes threadbare, the citizens of Plymouth watched the Mayflower set sail for England. Not one person asked to return. Okay. So we watch, they're going back. They decided to stay, except for the crew of the boat. When the birds were trilling and the leaves were swelling, an Indian came striding into Plymouth. Tall and very handsome, he raised his hand in friendship. "Welcome, Englishmen," said Samoset, Massasoit's ambassador, and the pilgrims murmured in astonishment. This savage spoke English. He was friendly and dignified. They greeted him warmly, but cautiously. Samoset departed and returned a week later with Massasoit and Squanto. For a few days, in a house still under construction, Squanto interpreted while Governor Carver and Massasoit worded a peace treaty that would last more than 50 years. After the agreement, Massasoit went back to his home in Rhode Island, but Squanto stayed at Plymouth. The wandering Pawtuxet had at last come home. So they met with the indigenous people there, and Squanto was home. Squanto had seen that the pilgrims didn't know how to survive in the New World. They could barely catch enough fish for their colonies, so he set out to teach them. Leading several men to the river, he waded into the water and, feeling with his feet, snatched a hibernating eel from the mud. He showed the pilgrims where the herring ran in the spring and taught them to fish with weirs and nets. He also took them to waters where cod and salmon were abundant. In late May, when the oak leaves were as big as thumbs, he led the men into the field and demonstrated how to grow corn. Squanto dropped several herrings in holes, covered them with soil, and pressed 4 or 5 corn kernels into the soil. He planted beans beside the corn so they could climb the corn stalks. He planted pumpkins and squash between the corn rows. These were plants of the New World that grew with vigor in the rich land. They grew well there. That was their kind of what their land would be able to grow. Squanto, though, he shared with the pilgrims the seeds that the descendants of his ancestors had brought to New England from lands far away as Mexico and Peru. Okay, so here he is showing them how to harvest and grow things. When the crops were thriving, Squanto took the men to the open forest where the turkey dwelled, and he pointed out the nuts, the seeds, and insects that the iridescent birds fed upon. Yeah, turkeys, and they'll tear up some stuff in the woods. He showed them the leaf nests of the squirrels and the hideouts of the skunks and the raccoons. Walking silently among bear trails, he took them to the blueberry patches. He told them that deer moved at sundown and sunrise. Right? He took them inland to valleys where the deer congregated in winter and were easier to harvest. He walked the pilgrims freely over the land. To Squanto and to all Native Americans, the land did not belong to the people. The people belonged to the land. They thought of the land differently than we did. See, he's kind of showing them all the different ways to be able to make it in this land. So he took the children into the meadows to pick wild strawberries. He showed them how to dig up sweet roots of the wild Jerusalem artichoke. In midsummer, he led them to cranberry bogs and gooseberry patches. Together, they gathered chestnuts, hickory nuts, walnuts, and hazelnuts in September. He paddled the boys into the harbor, into his dugout canoe, to set lobster pots made of reeds and sinew. While they waited to lift their pots, he taught them the creatures of the tidal pools. He taught them how to get lobsters and things in the water, too. Excuse me. The harvest of 1621 was bounteous, beyond the most hope-filled dreams of the pilgrims. They had lots and lots of stuff. Corn, bean, pumpkins, wheat, and barley spilled from their baskets. Larders were stacked with dried venison, salmon, herring, cod, and duck. Racks of wild berries lay drying in the sun. The chickens laid eggs abundantly, and cats grew fat on the field mice. It was time to celebrate. The terrible winter was done. The suffering was past. The new governor, William Bradford, asked Squanto to invite Mazoit and his few friends to a feast. He sent men out to shoot turkeys and ducks. The women baked. Boards were set on barrels covered with precious linens and placed in the middle of Leyden Street, the only street in Plymouth. Mazoit arrived the day of the feast with 5 deer and many turkeys. With him were not just a few guests, as expected, but 90. For a moment, the cooks were shocked. Then they recovered and quickly went to work. And that's what most we women do. We make it work. More bread was baked, more vegetables were cooked, and more turkeys were stuffed with bread and cranberries. For 3 days, the Pilgrims and Indians feasted. They played games, shot guns and arrows. This was not a day of Pilgrim Thanksgiving, which was every Thursday from dawn to dusk. This was pure celebration. Okay, it was not a day of Pilgrim Thanksgiving. Okay. But they did it together. Sound like it was a pretty yummy feast. Almost done. Oh, I got more pictures. So it must have been a regular Thursday tradition. Not just. Neither the Pilgrims nor the Indians knew what they had begun. The Pilgrims called the celebration a harvest feast. The Indians thought of it as a green corn dance. It was both and more than both. It was the first Thanksgiving. In the years that followed, President George Washington issued the first National Thanksgiving Proclamation. So that wasn't until the 1700s. Man. And President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed the last Thursday in November a holiday of thanksgiving and praise. Today, it is still a harvest festival and green corn dance. Families feast with friends, give thanks, and play games. Plymouth Rock did not fare as well. It had been cut in half, moved twice, dropped, split, and trimmed to fit its present-day portico. It is a mere memento of its one magnificent self. Yet to Americans, Plymouth Rock is a symbol. It might just be this little rock now, but it's a symbol to us. It's larger than the mountains, wider than the prairies, and stronger than all the rivers. It is the rock in which our nation began. The end. That's the first Thanksgiving. a lot of information there if you didn't know. It shows a lot of the people that helped establish this tradition we call Thanksgiving, which is a day to thank God for what we have. So I'm going to thank God for you today. So let's pray. Lord, I thank you for anyone that's watching this or stumbles across this, that they know that you love them and that I love them. I pray that they have a great week and they take time to thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thanks for tuning in. Have a great week. Bye.